Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, I invite you to like and subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend, and just spread the word on people that may enjoy some legal analysis of the Mass Casualty Commission. Today was day 9 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and today we had witness testimony from the 3 police officers who were first on the scene down Portapique Beach Road. And we also had our first look at cross-examination of witnesses at these proceedings and the sort of collaborative model that is being employed or perhaps best to say being developed by the commission and the lawyers that are working there. So it was, the witness panel took up the morning and a little bit into the afternoon. Most of the morning, well, it went late. It went until about close to 1 o'clock, with questions being asked by Commission Counsel Roger Burrell, who we've seen before presenting foundational documents, and the 3 officers were sworn in and testified together. Now, sometimes questions were asked of one officer specifically, but often the questions were given to the panel broadly, and whoever felt they were best positioned to answer the question spoke up, and sometimes several of the officers did. I thought the panel worked quite well, actually, in this circumstance. And I was thinking now, before today began, that if any of the lawyers had any difficulty with the testimony, I mean, of course, they would have all of these reports in advance and have some questions prepared for certain witnesses. And if any of the other lawyers for the other parties had a problem with the story or the main narrative of this portion, then we would have heard some strong objections to the 3 witnesses testifying as a panel. We had Constable Stuart Basselt, who has, I think, 24 years of experience, would be used to testifying, of course. Same goes for Constable Adam Merchant, who's about 15 years in, I think, to his service. But then you had Constable Aaron Patton, who's fairly new, and so, if you were trying to dig holes through some of this story, look for some contradictions that were, you were expecting to find, the likely approach would be you would want to question the officers individually and see if there's any daylight between the stories, particularly perhaps to be tough on Constable Patton, but as the junior member. But that wasn't the case, as we saw later in the cross-examination. But anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself too much here. We did, like I say, they were able to take advantage of their collective memory of events. And I'd say, though, for those that watched the presentation by Mr. Burrell a few weeks ago now of the foundational document, it's not as though we learned a lot of new information this morning. In fact, at times, they were sort of reiterating the story, and Mr. Burrell was asking sort of simple questions, or questions where everybody kind of knew the obvious answer. And for a while I thought, well, is he just trying to use up the time, rag the puck a little bit so that there'd be less time for cross-examination? But I guess that's just his style. As it turned out, the cross-examination took, I think, under an hour in the afternoon. So that wasn't the case. But that was my impression just watching it. I don't know what others thought of the sort of question and answer flow there, but now, just thinking about the foundational document presentation versus hearing from the witnesses, and I said this before, I thought it would be better to hear from the witnesses, and it certainly was. I mean, to hear it coming directly from them with their tone of voice as they had go through these memories that they had, a very distinct night in their life, certainly in their service, and they remembered it quite well. So, to hear it coming directly from them rather than the foundational document, I think just speaks to that part of the process, and I think we would be better served by having more testimony from the people directly involved and less of these, emotionless, in a way, presentations given by Commission Counsel. So we'll see if that changes or evolves as the proceedings move along. So when we getting into the actual substance of what was said today, it's clear that the officers took the call quite seriously. Now, in all cases, even the most experienced of these, Constable Basselt, this was the first time that they had ever dealt with an active shooter situation. All of them had training in it, though, and they took the call soon after 10 p.m. on the night of the 18th and drove as fast as they could from all over different parts of Colchester County, going 150, 160 plus kilometers an hour in their vehicles to get there. There was some discussion over the radio, and some questions were asked about, well, you question whether this might be a mental health call, somebody just making something up. Did you really take it seriously? Well, they say yes, they get a lot of these mental health calls where you show up at somebody's house and they claim somebody's in the yard, but there's nothing there, no footprints in the snow, like just completely made up situations. But they took this one very seriously from the beginning, and their actions certainly accord with that viewpoint that they expressed today in their testimony. They expressed a little bit of doubt initially that that it was really an RCMP vehicle. They thought maybe it was a vehicle, a decommissioned vehicle with some of the stickers maybe not taken off, or just something that looked like an RCMP vehicle. But they said that not so much in doubt, but more as to say, well, they were prepared to look for anything that was similar in nature to an RCMP vehicle and treat it seriously. But they did say also that had they seen an RCMP vehicle, this vehicle, the replica, that it would have been, they would have hesitated, and the shooter would have gotten the jump on them, certainly as well as he did the next day on the other officers. And so I guess it really just emphasizes, this testimony today emphasized to me the importance of ensuring that these replica vehicles are not allowed, that they're investigated and not permitted to be owned or really to exist for any reason. There's no reason for them to exist as a replica. Even the vehicles that are decommissioned from the RCMP, if there's a risk that a replica can be created, it's a dangerous situation. As we heard today, the officers would have hesitated to deal with somebody that was turned out to be an active shooter. The other question they raised early on is, well, why go down Portapique Beach Road rather than Orchard Beach Road? Because Orchard Beach Road was where the 911 call originated. Well, Constable Basselt said as soon as they arrived, he spoke with Andrew McDonald, who he knew from playing hockey against him, or with or against, and knew right away that it was an active shooter situation, and that they had to then they put in what they call the IARD process, which is what they do. They're training for an active shooter, and so they say that training kicked in. They'd all received the training and knew that they should be going on foot. First of all, they had their gear on, their hard armor. All of the gear, by the way, I think Constable Basselt said weighs about 70 pounds, 60, 70 pounds. So in addition to that, and as it turned out during the night, they looked at Constable Patton's watch after the fact and determined that they ran, walked, traveled about 10 kilometers just running around within the subdivision that night. So that's a lot of running, a lot of weight to be carrying, and they were certainly exhausted by the time, I think, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning when they went off shift and were relieved by others. So a difficult thing to do, but that was the training, was to go in on foot rather than go in with a vehicle. If you go in with a vehicle, well, you're a target. Anybody could be, you have an active shooter, they could easily set up behind, a tree or any other barrier, and you'd be a sitting duck. Of course, they could just aim for the driver's seat, and, there you'd be. So they go in on foot, taking some precautions while doing so as well to make sure that they're not ambushed, and it doesn't become another officer down situation. So question that emerged from that was, well, what about tracking, and how is that possible? Because in the vehicles there's these individualized GPS units. Individually, even though they have that 70 pounds of gear, they don't have this individualized GPS capabilities, or at least they didn't think so. As it turned out, in one of the cross-examination questions, Rob Pinio, who was questioning on behalf of the other lawyers, said, "Well, are you aware that these radios that you have GPS capabilities?" And the officers said, "Well, they were not aware. They weren't aware at the time. They've become aware through the preparation for the hearings. But the radios, the police radios, apparently have GPS capabilities, but aren't being used." So that's certainly a question. I mean, Constable Basselt said that he wasn't expecting really to get a lot of help from a supervisor or anybody off-site talking on the radio. It was more, what they could see in front of them and deal with themselves. But, you can imagine, and, everybody's seen these on TV and movies, where if you had GPS units that a supervisor who was off-site or on-site, but, stepping back, could be observing on a screen somewhere where everybody is on a map, and with their GPS units, and so maintain some operational control and add some safety to the situation for the officers that way. So if somebody in this situation specifically, if they're a real officer or if they're somebody else. So that's certainly, I would expect to be a recommendation coming out of this, is individualized GPS units for the police officers. The other thing, of course, that came up in the testimony today was Constable Basselt suggesting over the radio at 11:16 p.m., so fairly early on in the situation, that perhaps somebody should think about an emergency alert. He suggested it. And so as the panel was questioned about that, Constable Merchant mentioned, well, that's not a constable thing. In other words, a decision of that nature, not that they were really particularly aware of what the emergency alert system involved, but a decision of that nature would have to come from a supervisor, not from a constable. So this would be another thing. I say, well, actually, why not? You have the constable who's there. As Constable Basselt says, they're not expecting in a lot of ways help from a supervisor because it's difficult for somebody who's off-site to give a lot of guidance without having all of the detail. So why not have that constable who's on the scene, recognizes the active shooter situation and the impact that it's having and the chaos that it's creating, be able to have the authority to issue that emergency alert, particularly to a local area. So that kind of capability and authority is something that I think we'll have to look at as well as, or the commission will have to look at as they're making the recommendations. So yes, so that was sort of the main highlights, I think, of the substance of the evidence that was given. We did, like I said, see our first cross-examination. This was interesting. Now, over the lunch break, which was a later lunch break because the morning session went a little long, the lawyers apparently got together and talked about who was going to ask the questions, and they decided that it was going to be Rob Pinio, who's the lead lawyer for Patterson Law. So it certainly made sense that he was the person chosen. That won't always be the case, for these witnesses. There weren't a lot of cross-examination questions. There was a question about the GPS capabilities of the radios. They were asked about whether they saw a white Ford F-150 anywhere in the subdivision that night. A few other questions about decisions and when they saw certain fires ongoing, but these aren't the main witnesses that the parties wish to cross-examine, and some more senior officers and supervisors. I think you'll see some pressure to have each lawyer be able to ask questions individually. Really, handing over your questions to another lawyer to ask us cross-examination questions is very difficult. It's difficult to trust that they're going to get it right, and it's difficult as the lawyer to take somebody else's line of questioning and do it justice. So as some of the interests of the parties diverge, I think it'll be certainly more difficult to get that kind of collaboration on cross-examination. So anyway, we'll see how that develops with future witnesses. So that was today. By the way, Rob Pinio he appeared by Zoom for some reason, even though he has an office in Halifax. So I'm not sure what the story was there. I hope he's doing okay, if he's illness related or anything like that. But yes, we'll be back. That was it for today. Those were some of the highlights. The commission is back on Wednesday, and we'll hear from Deborah Thibault, and there'll be the foundational document presentation on the Wentworth and Hunter Road portions of events. So we'll be back then. I'll be watching to give a report afterwards and track it as it's going on. So whatever comes up that day, you'll hear it here. All right. So hope you found that interesting today. It was, sort of a precedent-setting day, certainly in regard to the witness panel and the method of cross-examination. We'll see if that continues. It seemed to work well today. It may work as well or not quite so well for future witnesses, so we'll see how that unfolds. All right, so we're back on Wednesday, and we'll see you next time.